to go ahead and start with today's program. My name is Amanda Cole, and I'm the Community and Economic Development Educator for Unit 18. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining today's Local Government Tele-Institute, GIS for Local Government. In front of each of you, you should have a copy of today's introduction slides. First, I just want to briefly go over today's agenda. Once again, my name is Amanda Cole. Ken Larimore will be the facilitator today, and we're going to have two presenters. Zach Kennedy is going to be speaking on GIS basics, and Dr. Mike Rudaba is going to be GIS for rural economic development. Today is part of the 8-part series for the Tele-Institute program. For those of you who are certified county officials and enrolled in the CCO program, I have provided Annette Cole's contact information, and want to remind you, if you are a county official and interested in joining the Certified County Officials program, to please send Annette an email or phone number and find out about how you can get involved. Today is the fourth of our 8-part series. For those of you who have taken part before, you're familiar with the way our program works today. We do ask that locally you press #5 to mute your phone. There will be a question and answer session today, and the best way to unmute your phone if you've done that is to once again press #5. We also have a chat box, which is on the lower left-hand side of your screen. So comfortable throughout today's program to submit questions to an individual speaker or to the entire group, and we will present those questions to today's presenters during the question and answer session. I also want to remind everyone to please fill out your sign-in sheets locally and the evaluation forms. They're so important to us to have. We need that feedback when planning future Tele-Institutes. Both the sign-in sheet and the local evaluation forms can either be mailed or faxed to Annette Cole, and her contact information is provided on the bottom of the evaluation forms. The 4 remaining sessions that are going to be offered this year, the next one is going to be January 19th on intergovernmental agreements, followed in February 16th by the importance of broadband, March 15th, special structure assessments, and we'll end this year's Tele-Institute series on April 19th, setting and permitting wind farms in Illinois. Now it is my pleasure to officially introduce Ken Larimore. He is the Community and Economic Development Educator serving Clay, Effingham, Fayette, and Jasper counties. He's originally from the Urbana area. He has a bachelor's degree in agricultural economics from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale and a master's of business administration from Eastern Illinois University. Locally, his programming has focused on sustainable economic growth, job creation, community leadership, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. Another area of focus is on international outreach programs, including trade, cultural awareness, and diversity. In addition to being very active within the University of Illinois Extension, he is also a board member of South Central Illinois Regional Planning and Development Commission, the International Extension Council, East Central Illinois Development Corporation, and Vice President of the Southeastern Alliance of Illinois. And for more information on Ken Larimore, please read his entire bio, which is included in your packets today and available on the screen, as well as his contact information. And now, Ken, if you're ready, I will officially turn it over to you. Ken, are you available? There's someone typing. Zach, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Zach, I'm afraid that Ken may be muted, and so while we're working through that, if you feel comfortable, go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Okay, great. My name is Zachary Kennedy. I'm a Community and Economic Development Educator, and I serve the Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties. My background, I'm from the Champaign-Urbana area. I have a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's degree in urban and regional planning with a concentration in economic development. I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak here today and kind of give a little overview before Dr. Mike Rudaba presents the main event. So with that, I guess I'll go ahead and just get started with the presentation. So I'm just going to provide just a brief introduction to GIS and a brief overview. When we're talking about geographic information, we're really talking about information about places on the Earth's surface. And this allows us to have knowledge about where something is located, or also what sort of natural or man-made features are around a given location. Geographic information can be very detailed. We can be talking about a few square feet on a certain property or parcel, or it can be very coarse. We can be talking about land cover patterns on an entire continent. So what GIS is, it stands for Geographic Information Systems, and it's a special kind of information system. Information systems are used to work with information stored in computer databases, and it happens that GIS, the information that we're concerned with, is about what is where on the Earth's surface. GIS has a wide variety of applications and can be used by a wide audience. Some of the things that might be most useful for county governments or local governments are that GIS applications can be used to engage problems such as crime reduction, public safety enhancement, siting of new schools. Redistricting can be used to do floodplain mapping, growth management, disaster recovery, tax mapping, economic development efforts. You can do school bus routing. You could use it to analyze where a new fire station should go. It can be used for land conservation, environmental impact studies. So essentially there are a wide variety of uses for GIS. It's up to the user to decide how best to use it. So when we're talking about these geographic databases, we're really talking about there's kind of two main types of data. We're looking at framework data and thematic data. And it's a loose division. The definition of framework data is that it's more general and it's often used as a foundation for the display of the thematic data. So the framework data is a set of continuous and fully integrated geospatial data that provides context and reference information for the country or the state or the county or whatever geography that it is we're interested in. Framework data are expected to be widely used and generally applicable, and they usually underpin and enable geospatial applications to run, and then you use the thematic data to build on top of the framework data. And so the graphic there kind of really summarizes how GIS systems work. You have this framework data, which is your baseline data, and then you put on top of that your thematic data. And when you overlay these different data sets, it allows for analysis. So for instance, if we had a land ownership parcel data set and we were interested in where properties that are going to be affected by flooding are located, we could lay on top of that a thematic data set of flood zones. And by having those two data sets overlapping, we can see very quickly where parcels that are close to the floodplain are going to be located. That's just one example. But this graphic in the middle that shows the different layers is really kind of the heart of how GIS works. So when I talk about layers, we're really talking about two different data types within GIS layers. We're interested in spatial data, which describes location, that's the where piece, and we're also interested in the attributes. That specifies what, how much, or when. And the way that these GIS layers can be represented, there's two main ways. First, they can be represented as a raster, which is an image, and the format of that is that each pixel or cell contains an attribute, or the data can be represented in vector format. And when we talk about vector format, we're talking about points, lines, or polygons. Regardless of the data set, all geographic data has four properties, and that's projection, scale, accuracy, and resolution. So a little bit more about raster and vector data. Raster data, when we create a raster data layer, you're basically creating an area that's covered by a grid with usually equally sized cells or pixels. And then each of these cells is assigned an attribute, and they're recorded based on whatever the majority feature in that cell is. This will become more clear when we take a look at a picture of what a raster data set will look like. Image data is of itself a raster type because the cells of an aerial image contain attributes. So aerial imagery would be an example of a raster data set. The converse or complementary type of data is a vector data set. And the fundamental concept when you're talking about vector GIS is that all geographic features in the real world can be represented either as points or dots, lines, or polygons or areas. So for instance, what we might represent with points or dots would be trees, poles, fire plugs, airports, or cities, depending on the scale of our map. Lines may be used to depict streams, streets, or sewers. And then with polygons or areas, we may be depicting land parcels, the boundaries of a city, county. We may be delineating where a forest is, or we may be mapping a certain rock type or geological feature. So this graphic here kind of shows perhaps the map underneath the P could be maybe soil type, and so you have A, B. And when we convert this into a framework that you can use in GIS and in a raster format, you would have what you see on the right there, and each cell has an attribute. And so depending on the resolution of the data set is how precise you can be. So for instance, some raster data sets, the cells themselves may be 30 feet on the side. They can go down to as little as a foot on the side. So the resolution of the data set really kind of shows how accurate or the data set can be. So in contrast, here we have an example of using vector data layers. This would be a polygon example. When we look at the parcels, we have streets that are represented by lines, and then in this example, points are representing fire hydrants. So this shows the three main forms that vector data takes. So here we have kind of a side-by-side comparison. In that little graphic on the left, there's a plot of land with trees and a stream. And if we vectorize the data, we would get something that looks like the image on the left, where you have polygons representing where the stream is, or maybe there's a set of lines, and then you have a polygon representing the trees. Whereas if they were rasterized, you would have the cells again, and then the numbers inside the cells would represent the attributes. So 1 would perhaps stand for water, and 2 would be vegetation or trees. So that kind of shows the difference between raster and vector data. The raster data, the vector data is much more precise, but the trade-off is if you're using vector data, it's a lot more taxing on a computer's resources, and when you're covering a large geography, you could be looking at really heavy data sets that are really processor intensive, whereas raster data sets are easier for the computer to do the analysis. So you can analysis more quickly using a raster data set, and then the file sizes are going to be much more manageable. Another important concept to know about when you're talking about GIS is the concept of metadata. And by definition, metadata is just data about other data. And what metadata do is they describe the content, quality, condition, and characteristics of a data set that we might use in GIS. And it's through the evaluation of the metadata, the user can determine if a certain data set will meet your needs. So basically, this is the idea of when you're going and looking for publicly available data, they should have it cataloged in a way where you can easily find what you're looking for. And then the flip side of that is whatever data sets that GIS users create, they need to make sure that they follow a metadata process so that your data can be shared with others, and they know exactly things such as what geographies are covered by the data set, when was it created, etc. So kind of looking at what the common GIS software is, Esri is the industry standard as far as makers of commercial GIS software. The most widely used GIS software is ArcGIS. They have different versions of ArcGIS. Some are relatively inexpensive, some can be very expensive, and it really depends on the needs of your county as to what system would work best for you. To Esri's credit, they do provide excellent training materials. I've included a URL to the training gateway. Some of them are for cost, but some of them are actually free. A lot of their introductory level trainings where they're introducing basic concepts are available free of charge. There are also free and open source GIS frameworks you can work in. Kind of the one that is most widely used is Quantum GIS or QGIS. Again, like I said, Esri products are kind of the industry standard, and that's what most people are working with. But if you're looking for an option that is low cost or actually free, you could use QGIS. And then finally, I'll just highlight some of the data sources that I've found useful in my work when I'm using GIS. First would be the Illinois Natural resource Geospatial Data Clearinghouse. This is a wonderful resource for data that's specific to Illinois. They have baseline data, which is going to be things such as political boundaries. They have data on infrastructure, which is going to be all of your roadways and rail. They have elevation data, bedrock data, superficial geology, and they also have waterways. And so I really suggest that you go there and kind of take a look and see all the wide variety of data that are available there. And if we have time at the end, maybe we'll look and see what the interface for that website looks like. And then something that's kind of similar on a national level is the geo.data.gov, and that's kind of the national clearinghouse for geospatial data. You can search by topic, so if you're interested in a particular, using GIS for a particular topic, or you know the data type that you're looking for, you can just do a search on their system and see all the different, it's kind of a cataloging website that kind of points you in the direction of all kinds of different data sets. And then finally, there's the U.S. Census Bureau Tiger Line, and Tiger Line shapefiles, which are layers, are spatial extracts from the U.S. Census Bureau's MAF/Tiger database, and they contain the most up-to-date features such as roads, railroads, rivers, and they're continuously updated every year. So you'll notice that some of the ones on the first resource may be a little outdated. If new developments go into a particular county, they may not be reflected. But if you go to the Tiger Line website from Census, they do a good job of updating their files, usually on a yearly basis. So that was all I had. I am going to turn it over. If Ken is with us now, he can introduce Dr. Rudaba.
This is Ken Larimore, and if you can hear me, hopefully. Thank you very much, Zach Kennedy. That was a great presentation, and you're a great resource for many different topics. I think we could take a couple of questions and answers, or questions right now, if they want to unmute, star or #5. Otherwise, you can put in your questions in the chat box, and we will address them later as we get time. So without waiting on additional any questions, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mike Rudaba. Dr. Mike Rudaba's career started as a faculty member instructing Earth Science and Geographic Information Systems courses at Lakeland College in 1996. Dr. Rudaba holds a BA from Eastern Illinois University and an MA and PhD from Indiana State University in Economic Geography. His dissertation research focused on assessing the impact of location and resulting influence on strategic planning issues impacting community colleges. He currently holds the position as Director of Mapping and Analysis for the Partnership for a Connected Illinois. And I'd like to make a special note about Dr. Rudaba. Last month, Dr. Rudaba was awarded Instructor of the Year by the Illinois Community College Faculty Association. So congratulations, Dr. Rudaba. So at this point, if Dr. Rudaba is connected, I will turn the program over to him.
Thank you, Ken. This is Mike Rudaba, and I hope I'm off mute and hope everybody can hear me. Can I get a confirmation from Ken or Amanda that you can hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I will share my screen because we're going to have a series of maps and slides here. I think will look better if we just go directly off my screen. So if we could let me share my desktop here, and I will start the presentation, and so you guys can see a GIS system in action as well. So I have a GIS system loaded on my desktop, and I want everybody to see me doing some work later. So Amanda, can we push the share over to me to take control?
Yes, it should be on the bottom underneath the PowerPoint slides. It'll say to request sharing or to start sharing.
Okay, will do. I put my screen.
Yes, it is starting to come through.
Okay, good. I will get going here, and you should see a slide, PowerPoint slide, with says Rural GIS Applications. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mike Rudaba, Rural GIS Applications. I teach at Lakeland, and this is a workshop that I've done as part of the Geotech Center, and I will give you a few background on the Geotech Center. But one of my passions in education is linking digital mapping technologies to rural issues, primarily involved with economic development and higher education are my two passions. So I'm going to go over today with the talk I've given in a number of communities in East Central Illinois and some in Southern Illinois on geospatial technology awareness and the implications on sort of rural economic development. I work directly with an organization called the Geotech Center, which is a National Science Foundation Advanced Technical Education Center. And this organization's primary responsibility is to be an advocate for better linking education with workforce issues shaping the geospatial technology sector. Simply put, the federal government believes that there are more jobs out there than there are trained people that are currently available or being produced through the educational pipeline for geospatial technology. So simply put, the Department of Labor, the National Science Foundation, they want to see community colleges and high schools and junior highs beginning to work together to begin to produce more students that are aware of geospatial technology careers, so when they go to pursue higher education, that they understand the potential and implications of geospatial technology. And so the Geotech Center, and you can see their URL up at the top there, we have a variety of resources from our website that the people on this call could be very interested in for their communities. And they involve curriculum resources for faculty at high schools and community colleges, faculty professional development, and student recruitment, workforce studies, and hardware and software issues that could be important for bettering GIS applications at a local level. The topics for today, for my talk in particular, though, deal with how a community could use geospatial technology to better understand local issues relative to economic development and overall quality of life issues that communities could draw upon the technology. So we're going to basically, Zach's really covered the introduction, so we'll go quickly over that. But we want to overview the impacts of geospatial technologies and what they mean at a community level. And what I think will be a highlight for some of you is to see a GIS demonstration of what I would call the signature data set for local communities called a Parcel Map. And I think it's important for everybody on the call to see what a Parcel Map is and what it does and how it could be used in new and creative ways to better serve our communities. And then maybe some potential future directions for training, which I think all of us on the call know is going to be a critical issue in a lot of our communities to better understand geospatial technology, is the ability to target really good training to get people more comfortable with the technology. And that's what we'll end with. And I think we do have a scheduled break in there, and I'll let Amanda or Zach or Ken let me have, I think we have a rough plan of where we'll have an embedded 5 to 10 minute break. Is that correct, Amanda?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end for if you have any questions that you have of any of the slides or maps you've seen. So the map you see on the right is a map that I did kind of putting together what Zach was talking about, a vector and raster data. This is an aerial photograph, which is raster data, with the boundary of the city of Shelbyville, which is polygon data, with the points of where all the businesses are located in the city of Shelbyville, trying to understand the concentration of business activity in the city of Shelbyville. And this is just a nice map I produced for a community event in Shelbyville, showing an example of raster and vector data and how they kind of all can come together for a visual. And obviously, using this map, you can sort of get a sense where the business activity is in the city of Shelbyville relative to where there's a clustering of businesses locating close together, and maybe more importantly, where there's no businesses, which is just as insightful at times. Primarily in Zach's talk, he talked about GIS, but increasingly at a national national level, there's this term being used called geospatial technology, or just GST. And GST stands for GIS, which Zach went well into, Global Positioning Systems, and Remote Sensing. Global Positioning Systems is what many of us are all becoming aware of in our cell phones, in our cars. Many students educationally are using this for geocaching. And we know that GPS is literally transforming how we reference and locate things on the Earth. Remote sensing is aerial photography, either in the form of satellite images or in the form of aerial imagery from a plane. And Google Earth has made remote sensing famous. As many of you know, students, many are getting familiar with using Google Earth, and of course they all want to map their small town or their home. And educationally, it's transforming the field of geography, which is what I teach. These fields are effectively the digital inventory of the Earth's natural resources, its populations, both human and animal, and wildlife. So these technologies are literally transforming the way we inventory humans' imprint on the Earth and the way we impact the Earth in a variety of ways with our population. These fields collectively, academically, are beginning to be referred to as geomatics. And it's a very growing field in academia, and that's why many of you on the phone, some of the fields I'm going to talk to you about today did not exist 5 to 10 to 15 years ago. And I'm going to show you the sort of the growth in the geomatics field for jobs, and why should we be interested in geomatics at small rural communities. And obviously, we think geomatics has the ability to transform the way communities inventory and market themselves for economic development. Just as a backstory, geospatial technology has arisen for a variety of reasons, and I put 2 or 3 trigger events. At a macro level, globalization has brought more and more places closer together through technology. As we all talk about in education, the world is getting smaller and smaller. Geospatial technology then is remapping these interconnections, the way countries are connected together through commerce, the way the internet is connecting how people communicate. So geospatial technology is increasingly part of this interconnection and the use of maps to demonstrate where I am and where I am in relation to other things. So Google Earth is really cool about showing where I'm at, but what really makes Google Earth really cool is understanding not only do I know where I'm at, but also where other things are around me, like restaurants or other places of interest to me, and that's what geospatial technology brings to the table. The rise of the internet obviously is making it easier and easier to move data, and as Zach's presentation referred to, this technology is about moving data for analysis at its core. And the rise of the internet, cheaper computers, faster internet connectivity through broadband is transforming and making GIS and geospatial technologies much easier to use. Then there's 2 trigger events that just historically have to be talked about. 9/11, we obviously had a transformative event where thousands of Americans died, and we learned as we analyzed the event, many of the departments through fire and law enforcement could not communicate effectively about where their resources were. And then we talked about August 28th, which was Hurricane Katrina, which was another event where these 2 events shook the United States to its core, and increasingly the federal government wanted to look for technologies and solutions to better improve communication. So everything we're going to show you, I think, kind of evolves from these trigger events. And for the sake of time, I'm going to do this very quickly. To put a picture on what Zach was talking about, I'm going to bounce over to the link that you see on the slide to the Geospatial Revolution Project, which is on the page, and I'll make sure Amanda has this presentation to put out to the people on the call. And the Geospatial Revolution Project was a product put out by Penn State University to help people at a local level communicate what is geospatial technology. So if you see the Geospatial Revolution, there are a series of episodes down at the bottom in the form of tabs. And if you're an educator or a community organization that's trying to communicate the value of geospatial and you want to put a video to what Zach was talking about, this is just a great solution to give a board member at a county level or a mayor or an educational organization, a visual of geospatial technology. And so these are a series of YouTube videos. Episode 1 is just an introduction to geospatial technology. Episode 2 deals with community government or local government, entrepreneurialism and how businesses use GIS, and how the federal government uses GIS to look at healthcare outcomes in a local community. So episode 2 is about local government, business, and healthcare. Episode 3 is about issues with public safety, law enforcement, and military applications, which I would argue are at the roots of geospatial. I love this picture, by the way, of this lady sitting in this control room, and if you look on the back of her shirt, it says Crime Intelligence Analyst, and I don't know if you can read that on your screens, but this is the reality. Geospatial technology has created a position that did not exist 10 to 15 years ago, and I would suspect in our small rural communities that their control rooms don't look like this, but sometime in the near future, even the small suburban and rural communities at some level will be utilizing geospatial technology to the scale. And as a matter of fact, that would be exactly the kind of person that I would be marketing my curriculum at Lakeland for, is a crime intelligence analyst is obviously somebody in the business of using data for profiling and understanding criminal activity in a community, and you can see that by that screen. Episode 4 is about issues that I think are very at the heart of East Central Illinois, and they deal with agriculture and the issues of tracking a disease and monitoring climate change. And so they get more environmental and agricultural applications in Episode 4, which I think would be very interesting and obviously relevant to people in an agricultural economy. So you guys have been through these, and I'm going to just go back to Episode 2, and you would just simply click the play button, and you guys can go through these, and I would argue, and you can start to see it load in, and these videos are just spectacular at demonstrating visually to people who don't understand geospatial technology. They're 10 to 15 minute videos that really communicate the power of geospatial technology, primarily from the national government's perspective or the federal government's perspective. At the end of this discussion, I'll be talking to you about a series of videos that I'm producing like this at Lakeland for more local demonstrations that deal with talking and interviewing people in Newton, Illinois, or Shelbyville, Illinois, or Charleston, Illinois, that are GIS organizations, and we've kind of probed them how they use GIS and why students in particular should be interested in more careers in geospatial technology. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint slide, and this was the geospatial revolution, and you can see the URL there, and I'll make sure, again, Amanda gets this, and I would argue all of you, these are powerful videos that you could use to communicate geospatial technology at your community level. The reason why we use technology, though, and is the reality in my work is to get people interested in geospatial is this idea of ROI, and that stands for return on investment. And here's a couple of books with the authors that if I was at a local level, I would definitely get my hands on these books to understand how to communicate geospatial technology with my colleagues in my neighborhood or my community or my partners. These two books are kind of critical books to understand why people use technology, and in particular mapping technologies. And there are a series of case studies that document what is the return on investment. And as we all know, budgets are tight. Communities are being pressed for resources. When you have any new idea, you better be able to justify how better it's going to measurably impact a community, either to save people time or money. And at the heart, geospatial technology is about these benchmarks. So the articles from these books cover about 22 business sectors, and they cover about 75 articles, and they deal with how businesses and local governments, people that have implemented geospatial technology, what did they get back from the technology that justified the investment? And when you look over on the right-hand side of this slide, they almost all have something to do with the following list. Either we're saving money and time and better serving our customers or our community. Either they're going to be improving communication or collaboration among partners. They're going to support decision-making so that when a mayor or a CEO of a company or a business When they decide to expand an operation, they have better data to make the case. They aid with budget development so that when budgets are being redirected in different areas, they can communicate to the public or to their customers or their board why they did what they did, and they have data to suggest why they made those decisions. Managing resources, and like for utilities, and I work with a number of utilities in this area, that knowing where all our infrastructure is at in our small towns is critical to better how to market our community. So when we want to bring in new businesses, we can instantly tell them where the water lines are, what kind of power and utility infrastructure we have to serve a new business. And cities with a good GIS system have a better capacity to document this information. In some examples, we have GIS examples that generate revenue, where a small community uses their GIS system to apply for a grant, and because of their GIS, they produced a better data-driven grant demonstrating why they had a need. So a community that writes a grant, and as part of the grant, they have to demonstrate an unusual case of first generation or a higher rate, let's say, of poverty. Using a GIS system with some of the census data that Zach referred to, a community can say and demonstrate quantitatively, not only do we know how many people we live below poverty, but we know exactly where they live in our community. And we know how our city compares to other cities. So we can demonstrate through GIS that we have a unique need. And the last one, there's just improving access to government. This is one of my things that I'm going to be demonstrating to you with the Parcel Map here in a second, is that ideally GIS is often referred to as the great technology to make government more transparent to the public so that they can learn more about what officials are doing, why they're doing what they're doing, and it's going to be a great equalizer so that people that can't travel to a courthouse because of a disability or because of age should have some options potentially through internet to access much of a community's infrastructure and information about their properties online. The Geospatial Revolution project, in a lot of ways, puts a visual to all these things I just talked about. So the videos that I just talked to you about through Penn State often give a nice video of examples of each one of these stories that might be relevant in your communities or region. Well, the reason why we're on this call is, in a lot of ways, and the reason why the Geotech Center it was even funded, and the Geotech Center was given $5 million from the National Science Foundation over a period of 4 years. And this graph was at the heart of it. The Department of Labor produced this chart, and this is the series of new occupations that are being developed and resulting from the result of geospatial technology. The ones with an asterisk next to it are the ones that were added in the 2010 census. And you can see how numerous occupations did not technically exist 10 years ago. So when I was a new young teacher, I used to talk about teach students for the geospatial industry when I was starting in 2000 or 2001. And technically at that time, our federal government didn't even know what to call these jobs. 10 years later, through a lot of research and rigorous work with understanding the geospatial economy, the Department of Labor has produced this table, and you can see that effectively the job growth is for these different occupations is spectacular nationally. And that right now that we're expecting to add from 2008 to 2018 over 339,000 jobs, and that will take the geospatial workforce over 1 million. And as a result of this chart, the National Science Foundation said, where are our schools and where are our colleges at to prepare students for careers in these emerging fields? And they simply estimated from the data they had that the educational system was not prepared, and that's why Geotech Center was funded. And the ones on there that are of particular interest to me is the ones called Geographic Information Technician, Geospatial Information Scientist, and Precision Agricultural Technician. Those are jobs that I think are going to be very specific to East Central Illinois, and that we're already beginning to see a need for these positions. And I'm going to give you guys, at the end of this, a little bit of background of how to find out information about those. What do you have to know to work in those fields, and how would we prepare people in our communities to compete for jobs in these sectors? And what's amazing about these jobs is many of these jobs you can work for firms anywhere in the world, because so much of the geospatial technology sector is driven by digital technology. So that as long as you have the software and you can move data, I could work for firms anywhere in the United States doing GIS. And that's what I envision at Lakeland. And this is the power of geospatial technology, is that it's going to give our students the ability to connect to high-growth firms, maybe in Washington, D.C. or Chicago or Denver, because many of these jobs will allow our people in our communities to compete for jobs in other areas, and many of these jobs you might not necessarily have to move to take them. And I honestly believe that's where a lot of my students will be in the next 5 to 10 years. This is where I would go if you wanted to learn about these different sectors, and if you wanted to understand what the federal government thinks you have to know to work in these fields, what type of skills, what types of salaries would we expect, and you were looking for just overall job descriptions, you could go to the Geospatial ONET online section. So the Department of Labor, and I'll click on here real quick and we'll bounce there, and you should see the ONET website come up. All you have to do is type in the top right a sector that you're looking for, and I'll type GIS, and you will see the ONET occupations that are most closely aligned with geospatial technology, and you can click on any one of these for a description of that occupation. The one that's most important to me at Lakeland is the GIS technician, and you can get a nice description. And I've given this talk at Centralia, and the folks down in Centralia found this very interesting because they were looking at some employers down there of how to write jobs descriptions, because this technology was new enough that they were needing help with how to write job descriptions to hire a GIS technician. So here's the federal government's perspective of what a GIS technician does, and I highlight there the type of skills we would expect them to be doing, the types of tools and technology that we would expect them to be able to do, the overall knowledge skill sets that we would expect them to be able to do, and maybe the most important thing down at the bottom is they have information on educational requirements and salary. And if you wanted to get down and compare salary, you could actually go to your state and click Go, and you can see how your state compares to state and national averages for that occupation. So you can see here how Illinois stacks up on an hourly projection for what people make for a GIS technician. And again, these are averages. You can get this down to regional numbers if you use these links down below. And these links down here below allow you to compare a specific county. And as I would assume some of you look at these numbers here, some of you are thinking they're a little bit high. And that's why they give you on the ONET the ability to define a county or an area, and it allows you to compare your area versus a state and national averages for that occupation. So you can better determine what an occupation requires for that sector. So this is a neat tool, especially for when you're trying to assess new and emerging fields like geospatial technology or green technology or biotechnology, that clearly in a lot of rural areas they're new and emerging areas, and they give us some direction on how to write job descriptions and understand how to work with local school districts to understand these new and emerging fields for understanding their size, scope, and descriptions. I would say that this is the highlight of the talk, and this might be where a natural break might be for Amanda here in a second, so I'll let our group get ready for that. But I want to introduce, this is what I wanted to show the group. In East Central Illinois, the foundation of most GIS mapping systems for most of our communities is called the Parcel Map. And this is a parcel map of Coles County. And I'm going to give you some reasons of why, to understand the local GIS, why you have to understand this data set. And I'm going to give you a demonstration here in a second of how to use this data set. But this is what a GIS looks like, and I'm going to give you a kind of a step-by-step. At the end of this talk today, I think Zach and I and some of the presenters are going to be very interested in what are the next natural progressions of how to move forward with training our communities to better leverage and use these data sets. So I will move forward to the next slide. And I wanted to give you a zoomed-in view of what a parcel map looks like here, of what my home looks like on a parcel map. So I clipped this out. I live in Charleston, and a parcel map, as Zach said, is basically vector data. And those little squares and rectangles you see drawn on there are basically the legal descriptions of the boundaries of how local governments evaluate property ownership relative to area and value. And this is the very foundation of how communities generate local revenues through taxes, local property taxes, which we could have a whole separate talk on that issue. We know that it's a very controversial issue. How it works, one thing I can tell you that is not controversial, that technology is transforming how it works. And GIS mapping systems are evolving to speed up and mechanize sort of what big farm machinery did to agriculture maybe 70 to 80 years ago. Geospatial technology is doing the same with local government. And so on this map, we can see what I own, and I will put my cursor on here and hope you see it. That defines how much land I own, and there's actually going to be information associated with that area that defines how much of land I own, what's it worth, and what is my responsibilities as a local property owner. This parcel level view is historically used to evaluate property taxes. And 20 to 30 years ago, the parcel map was on a paper map. It was drawn with paper and pencil, and all of the information that we knew about an individual property was stored in paper files in drawers. And if you wanted to find out about your property, you had to go to the local courthouse, and they had to bring out your map, then somebody had to go to the file drawers and pull out your information about your property. And then they would put the two side by side and say, okay, here's your property, here's a map of it, and here's the information we have on your property. And of course, GIS has put that all together in one quick fail swoop. And you're looking at basically in a GIS, all of the information the county or the municipality knows about a property is connected interactively with the map itself. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is with GIS now and all of this information that has been constructed, and the digitization of our local parcel maps has been very costly. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for each county. There are so many other things that we can do with this data now in a GIS to better serve our citizens that I've always been pushing, that these parcel maps are the beginning to understanding a whole host of other issues. And that's at the heart of the discussions I've had in many of the communities in East Central Illinois. And what I'll talk to you about through my examples is the ability to use these maps to support grant development at a state or federal level, to better understand site selection studies to recruit new businesses into communities. The ability to use these maps for emergency response modeling. In our area, that probably takes the form of a flash floods and severe weather. And I'm going to give you an example of one of my personal interests is emergency response modeling and how these maps could be very nicely used from a mayor or a county board or a city board to better understand that they could use these tax assessment maps to understand and model what would happen if an F5 tornado come into Moultrie County coming out of the northwest. How many people would be dislocated? How many families would we have to potentially house if it came along a certain highway? So I'll show you an example of that. And generally just making government more available to citizens. I see this idea of people being able to access and not having to drive into a county courthouse to retrieve this information obviously has implications. And the idea of healthcare. These parcel maps could be very much a part of rural healthcare networks and helping communities map needs potentially with their local county or regional hospitals to better serve people, some sort of a busing system or public transportation system to move people back and forth to hospitals when you know where people come from to the hospital requiring certain transportation requirements. This will be an important aspect as well in our communities to use GIS to support healthcare needs. So I'm at the point now where I wanted to do just a 5 to 10 minute overview, and I'm going to launch a GIS software application. And I think we're at the 50-minute mark, and I didn't know if Amanda, if this is a natural point for a 5-minute break so people could come back and I'll have the software up and running.
Yes, and if we could ask some questions that have been submitted online before we start that break, if that would be okay with you?
Yes, that's great.
I'll go ahead and ask the first question. Have you ever used or recommended GIS, open source software, or IDRISI software, which is relatively low cost?
Well, they certainly are options. I have not used them, and for a lot of rural communities, they are going to be maybe the best option relative to cost. The reason why I've never used them, and I tend to use Esri products, is the educational support materials and tech support typically is better with them. And because I work in education, I've been lucky to have grant money, and I'm very aware that I've been spoiled in a lot of ways. But I support Esri products with my curriculum because so much curriculum and training materials have been written for Esri products. And so Esri's big strength is that it's very flexible and there's tons of educational materials. And I'm very aware, though, the downside is that there's a cost associated with it, and it can be quite steep for some communities. So if you're a community and cost is an issue for getting your GIS system up and running, you will have that as an option, but I think your downside would be you're going to kind of be more on your own, and maybe Zach can speak to this. You're going to have to be kind of self-trained because I just don't think you're going to have the robust set of curriculum and training and tutorials out there for those free products, those free source, open source products.
I would concur. I've used Esri products primarily. Not only does Esri themselves provide a lot of support, but there's also a user community. Since Esri is kind of the industry standard, if they can't answer your questions, a lot of the times you can go on the forums, and Esri users are just as good and responsive. If you go to a free and open source, that's a trade-off. You won't have the support that you'll have with an Esri product.
Okay, this is Amanda again. Thank you for that answer. We have another question. Does a government agency have the right to copyright its digital data, or does FOIA prohibit that from taking place?
It's been my experience that I'm unfamiliar with FOIA, but just from working with county GIS staff, some counties charge access to their data, and 10 years ago, that's where most of them were. So if a local farmer or an educational institution or another office wanted to use these parcel maps that I'm going to show you, there would be some cost recovery. It seems increasingly that more and more of them are moving to just making them available through their websites and making them free. And that seems to be the trend that I've noticed. But 10 years ago at this time, I was on the Coles County GIS board, and we really debated about this, and I don't remember any limitations of FOIA or any. It was a county-by-county level issue of how they wanted to get to justify cost recovery. And how most communities get cost recovery for GIS system is what's called a recorder's fee. And different counties have different recorder's fee, and I think they range from $5 to maybe $20, and that's just embedded fee as part of your tax assessment process, and that's what generates many tens of thousands, upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars to justify and drive a county GIS operation. And that's why I've told people, and I've talked to Ken Larimore and a number of the people I work with in this region, these GIS systems often have budgets in the tens of thousands, upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars that they get through their recorder's fee. They're big scale projects.
Zach, did you have anything to add to that? If not, I have another question to ask.
No, go ahead.
This one kind of goes along with that. Have you heard of or maybe seen examples of government agencies entering into or establishing licensing agreements to respond to requests by non-governmental agencies?
Yeah, I think a lot of the counties, the ones that have GIS systems, are increasingly having to deal with these requests. And they come from economic developer or potentially businesses. And I would say that I would have to get that answer probably from one of my past students that runs the Coles County GIS, Kelly Lockhart, is many of our communities, there's only 2 or 3 in East Central Illinois that have had GIS systems, I think, in place for over 10 years, and that would probably be Effingham County and Coles. Most of them are so early on with their GIS systems, and many of our local communities and counties still to this point have much of their GIS being managed from external offices. And often they're from technology firms up near Chicago. And they haven't dealt with a lot of the management of their own data. And as I advise more and more of the counties to get more control of their own local data, that's going to be an issue that hits them. And I think we would have to lean on Effingham County and Coles County as probably 2 of our test counties in East Central Illinois. And in other areas, Champaign County would be another example, that are counties that have been at this a while. And obviously the Chicago Beltway counties, they've been at it for 20 years. So I don't want to exclude them. If you go to DuPage County, I wouldn't be surprised that they've had a lot of experience with this as well. And that might be a follow-up conversation that we would have to get those counties involved because they've had the longest experience of dealing with those types of requests. But in our area, like East Central Illinois, I only know of 2 counties that probably manage their own data in-house. Still to this point, most of the counties farm out most of their management of their geospatial technology and their data to outside vendors.
Another strategy is to form a consortia where you're spreading the cost to multiple people who have the same interest in the same GIS data sets that you have. For instance, in Champaign County, some of the consortia members would be the county government as well as the local public education institutions. That's another strategy that groups go to.
There's entire sets of textbooks that are being produced called it's sort of legal issues associated with GIS and the ethics of GIS for public uses. And if you were to Google those terms, there's an entire publication wing of the geospatial research arena that deals with sort of what are the legal implications of geospatial technology for economic development. And that's probably a whole nother series of maybe a webinar series just on that. And we probably would have to have a different set of speakers that would have experience. I would say GIS program managers. In Champaign, I know, has a spectacular group of leaders. And I know in Coles County we have some leaders that's what they do daily is to deal with those type of requests. And they've developed policies. And that would be a question that we'll ask at the end is, that might be a new area for us to look into for an educational webinar series, and we'll bring those folks in to lead on something that they've had to deal with in the last decade.
Very good, excellent discussion. And you mentioned the different resources. I get the quarterly report from ESRI on ARC News, and it has the different projects. GIS projects around the world, and it's fascinating to read through what is being done around the world with GIS technology. At this time, I think it's a good time to take a break. I have right at 4 o'clock. Let's take a 10-minute break and start up again at 4:10. And this is Ken Larimore again, and we're anxious to get back to our program. I think they're working with Dr. Rudaba on some screen issues at this point, but if he is available, maybe we try one more question before he gets back into his scheduled program. Mike, are you able to hear?
Yes. Can you guys see my screen?
No, we need you to share your screen again. It got lost during the break.
Okay.
Button on the bottom, please. Okay, we're back in action. Thank you.
Okay.
There's a question on spoke about the metadata. There's additional questions on the federal government's concern about the importance of metadata and how important it is for governments of all levels that are using GIS to consider and be trained in the standards, the international standards and national standards for metadata.
Yeah, if you're working at a federal, state, or local level, to be more transparent and be able to move data back and forth between the three different levels of government, there has been a variety of metadata standards so that when agencies save data and upload data back and forth, that they're actually structuring their own data in a way that they could all use and that they can communicate back and forth. And this, again, is what evolved after 9/11 and I think Hurricane Katrina, is this idea of we know that there are multiple levels of government, and that for these multiple levels of government to be able to communicate their data, there has to be standards. And in a GIS class, we would teach you at Lakeland, we have to do a couple of exercises of using 2 or 3 of those standards. And that could very well be a seminar series for us of understanding some of these two or three of these key standards that are often used by federal agencies. So if you want to apply for a federal grant, these are things that I would want to understand at a local level to make sure that our data is consistent with federal standards so that when we upload our data, by the way, a lot of times when federal governments throw out carrot money for locals to use GIS, they often do it because they want you to develop data that they want collected at a local level. And so you better be aware of these metadata standards or you're not going to be able to collect data that's consistent with their models. And I can tell you, I work in the broadband industry. We don't collect and code any data, and I'm going to show you a map here in a little bit that every code that we developed is based on a metadata standard that's developed by the National Telecommunications and Information Association, the NTIA. So, yeah, it's critical.
Thank you. So, are we ready to move on with the regular program?
I'm ready.
Great. We look forward to it.
Okay, this is ArcGIS 9.2. This is actually a little bit of a dated software platform for Esri. There's now out 10. In my office, I haven't updated. Every other computer on Lakeland runs ArcGIS 10. Ironically, the instructor's office, I have an older license, so it's kind of an irony of sorts. But I think we'll be able to give you an idea of what a GIS system looks like and what are the main things we use them for. And so I'll give you a quick demo here of what a parcel map looks like in ArcGIS and how a GIS technician or analyst at a Charleston or at a Newton or an Effingham or a Champaign-Urbana, one thing we know is that most county governments are using ArcGIS as their platform to work with the data. So this is probably pretty similar. Many technicians today are working in some small rural community. If they're doing their own GIS, they're probably using a platform that looks something like this. So this is the number one thing that people that use Google Earth are familiar with are these little exploring tools. You have a series of menus up at the top, and over on the left you have your databases that you've loaded in. I've loaded in 2 data sets. One's a vector data set, which is the parcel map. So you should be looking at a parcel map of about 23,000 polygons, which are the individual ownership units for landowners in Coles County. So I could use these tools here on the top to basically explore and look at this data, and I'll do that here in a second. Underneath it here is an aerial photograph of 1-foot pixel resolution aerial photography, which we actually have aerials of every house in Charleston has high-resolution photography, so we actually see real imagery of what's on the ground over these parcels. So I'm going to show you in a second of how that looks. And I only got the image, and I cropped out just the area around my home just for the sake of speeding up how quickly this loads in. So there would be hundreds of these underneath here, of these aerial photographs, but I only got the one that's underneath my property, because I wanted to speed up the draw process, because these, as I think Zach referred to, these raster data sets are huge, and that's why you have to have really fast computers to run them. So if any of you have an interest in what the cost of this software is commercially versus educationally, I have some of that information because I've licensed the software and work with people. So I have some of these numbers, and I think I can give you some ballpark numbers of what they would cost educationally or commercially if you're interested. So I'm going to use some of the tools on the top here, and the most frequently used tools in the GIS are the zoom tools. And I'm going to zoom into around Charleston. That's my hometown. And that's where I live here with my family. And I'm going to box in around my neighborhood. And this is my neighborhood here. And you should see the scale changing very dynamically. And you should now see a neighborhood zoomed in, correct? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make the vector data set, I'm going to make it transparent. And you'll be able to now see my property underneath it. And I'm going to move this around here. And I'm going to zoom in real tight around my home. You've seen this before in the PowerPoint. And so I've zoomed into my property in the center, and you could see my swimming pool in the backyard there. And you can tell that I'm in a wooded area. And we all know that we pay property taxes on any improvements we've made on the land, any new sheds or garages we build on. And this is one of the most immediate concerns that I think people at a local level can see with the GIS, is sometimes when people live in a certain area with densely populated trees, that unless you're really walking around the house, you could lose a lot of improvements. And there's been a number of studies that have shown the use of aerial photography, and I know that there's concerns about big government watching. Well, government's watching, and that's the reality of these aerial photographs. These photographs have been used to document how properties, how millions of dollars of improvements had incurred for years, and local governments had not caught them because they did not have the ability to see properties from the perspective of looking down. And this raster data set is so detailed that you can see very detailed patterns in a property that you just couldn't see on the ground. And so this is a nice tool for a lot of communities to find lost revenues that they weren't able to see on the ground as a property made vast improvements, but maybe they made them in their backyard tucked into trees like I did. And I actually, if you can look here, I actually did put a deck on my property, and I've actually haven't closed it in. And I would argue, unless you had driven around my property and got in the backyard through a fence, you would never see those improvements. So this is an example of how you could change the scale on a GIS, and a technician in a community can begin to see some things in a property that maybe the local tax assessor had not seen. And I know I'm probably not making a lot of friends by teaching this technology. There's probably a lot of people going, oh, this could be dangerous. And so I'm not for sure when I show this to a lot of people if they're really excited or not, but from a local government perspective, it's very exciting. So I'm going to zoom back out now and go back out to a global view, and this is what a county looks like when I make all the parcels transparent. And as you can see, out in the rural areas, people own more land. In the urban areas, they have much smaller parcels. And as I zoom into Charleston, you can see where the population is, and this is a very prominent area. I grew up around Carl Sandburg School on the west side of Charleston, and you can see in an urban area how the parcels change. But this is the whole hook for GIS. I put these two side by side. This information on the map is directly reflected in the database here over here on the left. In a courthouse, the maps of these parcels and the databases about the land ownership records were disconnected. They were in different drawers often, or in different file cabinets. GIS systems now have put these resources together so that effectively all of the information a community knows about a property is all attached in one map, in one database, all connected together. And they're all connected together by either this PIN number or a unique parcel number here. And I'll hope that you guys can see these tables on your screens. But each parcel is identified with a unique PIN number and or a parcel number, and that's a dynamic link between the map and the database, so that everything drawn on the map has a corresponding record in the database. And in this database, we have the legal description, we have the tax code for that property, the acreage, the land evaluation. These three columns here deal with the property evaluation. This column here is the land evaluation. Then you have the land use code. Any community that's trying to target economic development is often dealing with the business, and businesses can't locate just everywhere. Only certain properties having certain codes meet certain requirements for building or for locating a business. So you see on this map there, some of these properties have a 40, some of them are 20, some are 31s. And if you work as an economic developer or a GIS technician, you just learn to master what these codes mean, and that would be found in the metadata. That's an example of metadata where if you knew how to work with it, there would be a description that 40 equals residential versus 60 equals commercial. And a lot of times when small communities are marketing a business, they're really marketing the 60s. The 60s is where they have vacant properties or commercial properties that they're wanting to promote for jobs. So on my map, I'm probably, as an economic developer, I'm very interested in looking at all the ones that are counted as a 60. And I'll show you some examples of how to work with these codes here in a second. And so there's tons of data here. Many of these columns are unpopulated. For people in our counties, the key ones are the land use codes and the evaluation codes for the land and the homes or the properties that sit on that land, or the acreage that they own. So that's the database part of it. And what I want to show you here at the most simple level is 3 different scenarios of how this parcel map would be used. And I'm going to give you the first one is how it's probably used the most frequently. And it's most used frequently, somebody wants to just know where is my property and where is it on a map, and I want to pull my records. And this is probably the number one request when people go into a courthouse trying to find out about their property information. So on the toolbar, there's a tool called the Find. And I'm going to tell it to find, there's some guy in town with a weird name called Rudaba. And I'm going to say there's 27,000 records, or I think actually there's 23,000 parcels on the screen you're looking at. This request used to take probably, I've talked to tax assessors. It probably took maybe 15 to 20 minutes potentially to find this record. And of course, with the GIS, as a manager in a courthouse, one of the quick returns is this should be a lot quicker. And there are 2 parcels in town. One's called Mike and Lejean, and that's me. And there's one called Gary and Francis. And that one down there was a rental property that my mom and dad owned. And this one here is one that I own on the west side of Charleston. So I'll right-click on here, and I'll say, oh, okay, I want to select this record. Okay? And you should see a little blue dot on the map come open, and that's the record. And all I got to do is use my zoom tool and box around it, and there's my property. And if I go into the database, I can go Open Attribute Table and say, just show me the selected one, and there's my property. I now can print this map out and have the attribute information, and it took probably about 20 or 30 seconds. So there's an example of, and I know that my house is a residential, so if I went selected, we go to the land use code, it says 40 there. I know that all 40s on the map are single-family residential properties. So I often figure out the land use codes. If I know where a land use is, that I have a property or I have a friend there and I know what it's used for, I can kind of get most of these codes. But if I really had to know them, I'd have to call Coles County GIS manager, and I would ask him, I'd say, can you give me the metadata for your data set? And that's how I would learn how to use this data set more effectively. So that's the most common use of GIS, is probably to find something and to find it quicker than you used to be able to find it. My argument today is that often you shouldn't even need to go into the courthouse. The most progressive communities have web-based GIS. So if an economic developer wanted to find properties that met a certain criteria, they could do that off of an online mapping system and do a lot of their site locations off of the county or your municipal GIS. Now I'm going to do one a little bit more complicated. That this gets into more economic development. So let's put our hands in, let's put ourselves in the shoes of somebody trying to locate commercial property that has certain acreage that's in a certain township. In Coles County, there's 7 or 8 townships in the county. And I'm going to basically ask the database to find me all commercial properties that have an acreage greater than 10 acres that are only located in the Charleston Township area. And we'll see how quickly we can automate a search process. And we're going to do one of the next most common uses of a GIS is to do a query with multiple criteria in it that meet a specific need or want that a user has. So I've already built the query, and I did this right before we started to save time. And I basically said on my query string down here, I built a query that said, find me all of the land use codes that are equal to 60, and I didn't write it correctly. I'll have to stick an equal in here. And I still might get an error. So I want all the commercial properties. I want the acreage of those properties to be greater than 10 acres, and I only want to find the ones that are in the Charleston Township area. And I might get an error here on a syntax here. I might need to put a space in. Let me run it. And it worked. Great. So on my map here, I've now identified, I zoom into Charleston, and we now know we've reduced the research for the developer down to just seconds. We now have a working, manageable list. We can tell that most of these commercial properties are on the west edge of Charleston. There's a few on the east side. And these properties are all zoned commercially as Class 60 or Land Use Code 60. They have all over 10 acres. And they're all in the Charleston Township area. And so for a variety of criteria or reasons, this is what the developer needed to find. And if I go into the database and open up the attribute table, I can just say selected, and we can see that only 12 records met that criteria. And I was right the first time. There was 27,669 parcels on the map. So we effectively reduced something that might have taken days or hours before from the county courthouse. Now this search has been reduced down to seconds. So that's an economic developer application. And one last application, and this is, I'm going to take us over to Mattoon. And I'm going to go back to full extent. And I'm going to zoom into the south side of Mattoon where there's historic flooding. And let's just say that we bring in, and maybe Zach will do this at the end here, maybe we could bring in some flood data from the Illinois Geologic Survey, and they have 500 and 100-year flood zones. We could put that on this map, and we could effectively, for the mayor of Mattoon, say, well, what would happen if a 500-year flood event hit? And let's say we draw an area on the map, and I'm just going to sketch something. This would not look like a flood polygon or flood zone polygons because they would meander more. But I just drew a shape, and that's an area that does typically flood on the south side of Mattoon. And I could zoom into here to show you what this looks like. Those parcels. We can zoom into this area now, and we could take data from the state of Illinois on floodplains. I could then use that data at a local level and find out that there's effectively 852 parcels in that area that would be affected. Using that number now, we could model, if that 500-year flood event, we could probably begin to model what type of housing we would have to arrange. And using some of the data here, we could actually already begin to model the economic impact. I could come into here and use this land evaluation column and actually look at the statistics. And I could actually begin to sum up an economic impact on the land or the properties, and maybe more importantly, the properties, of what type of impact this would have and what kind of a relief we would need to rebuild those homes. Because this sum column here would be those 852 parcels for whatever property is built on there. So we would be looking at we're looking at, what kind of number are we looking at here? $16,623,472. That would be the cost of just the property, not the land, just the property that would be potentially wiped out on a major flood event if a 500-year flood event hit that area of Mattoon and was wiped out. And so there's some examples of how to use a GIS, and this is, again, what I believe these types of applications should be used prolifically in our communities. And often I just don't see a lot of our communities in Illinois using these parcel maps above and beyond for what they were designed for at the minimum. And at the minimum, they were designed to automate tax assessment processes. But there is a whole host of other applications that these huge investments could lead to demonstrate how technology could better serve communities. So I would argue the tax assessment process, which is really neat, just scratches the surface probably of what could be done to use these advanced mapping technologies to better serve communities. And I just wanted to give you a demo of that today. The parcel map is not the only thing that we could use. As Zachary referred to, there's some really neat data sets. One of the ones that I like to use with now is from broadbandillinois.org. The ability to download and use data about broadband availability at county levels. And this is an example of a statewide data set that I use to produce a scorecard to apply to each county to look at all of the carriers that are available in a county, the different speeds that they have availability in the geographic areas of a county. I came up with a scoring metric to give the different counties a score. So on the map on the left is actually looking at the percentage of a county geographically covered by different speeds. The map on the right is the percentage of the households covered by different speeds in a county in terms of broadband internet availability. So whether you're talking about geographic just coverage versus the coverage against population, I wanted to be able to produce a map to see which counties ranked higher or lower against one another. And the counties with the lower rankings have higher broadband and better broadband availability, and they're in green. And the counties that have the weakest broadband availability and the least amount of area covering the fewest number of households, they're in red. And this is probably what many of us already knew, that southern and western Illinois has weaker coverage than other areas. But now we have evidence. You know, this is something that could be used as a base map for a grant application for a rural broadband initiative. And that's why I wanted to make this map that these communities can now quantitatively show how far they're behind other counties in the state of Illinois. So I made these maps for rural communities that wanted to look at rural broadband grants and initiatives. And so that was an example. And as we know, rural broadband or broadband connectivity is power. And at different speeds, certain things become more and more available. And this was an example I got from a study that looked at different broadband speeds and how long it took to download a 3 megabyte pop song. And you can see the different scales here, but you can only imagine doing the same thing for healthcare outcomes for like a community using these maps to demonstrate how, you know, the different speeds with like healthcare, with like CAT scans or MRIs. To really make healthcare outcomes more available to rural areas, obviously they're going to have to address this broadband issue. And using this data set that I got from Broadband Illinois is an example of how they can demonstrate their unique need or case for maybe an external grant. And here's just one last example of the broadband visualization of using GIS. This is a data set that's online and can be downloaded, and a community like Clark County could demonstrate, you know, where they have coverage, where they don't have coverage in white, and how they compare to other places. Having visuals like this on a grant application can make all the difference to make a unique case or an issue, a data-driven case of why or why not they need to expand broadband in their region. This is my passion, and one of my last maps for you here before our discussion is obviously this is a rural community college in southern Illinois, and this is Kaskaskia, and I was just showing how over time where students come from this college, and the map on the left was done in 2009, and 16% of their students fell outside of 30 miles. We did the same study 2 years later, and that number had ratcheted up to 35%. And this is the reality of GIS mapping. I'm now able to use geospatial technology to show how empirically how this college's sort of service area is extending, and it's extending rapidly. And we've only got 2 snapshots here, but I think I could see this done in many other community colleges, that increasingly community colleges are drawing students from further and further away. You can take this same mindset of trying to work with local businesses and trying to work with them. Why do we think so many businesses are beginning to answer questions about, or asking a question, where is your zip code? Increasingly, businesses are trying to understand where is their market coming from. And using GIS and working at with our local communities, I've been desperately trying to get some of our partners around rural Illinois to begin to understand and construct geographically how they're drawing customers. This is going to be huge with their local businesses for better understanding how to market their products and services. And this is an example of how a community college can really begin to understand that increasingly they're drawing students from further away, and the use of GIS is making that happen. So to summarize, we've got barriers, and I've seen this from 10 years of working with small rural communities and trying to promote GIS education. Technical literacy and training are at the heart of getting more GIS leveraging and utilization in rural Illinois, and just Illinois in particular. Hardware and software availability is an issue. Appropriate training is an issue. I think the question for us to conclude is what kind of training models can we look at to guide us to move forward? What type of awareness resources can we look at to go forward? What types of new software technologies are maybe making this expensive software more available, and any other partnerships you guys know about on the phone? So I'm going to talk about the GTCM here in a second. That's what I do at Lakeland, is training models, and I think we're a national leader on understanding how to train people to work with that parcel map that I just showed you. The one that I'm going to talk to you about now is I'll just let you guys know that Lakeland is working with a variety of employers in East Central Illinois to do a geospatial revolution project in rural Illinois. So it's really cool to have the geospatial revolution project, but some of those employers, people around here, have trouble relating to. So we have begun to interview employers in Newton, Shelbyville, Charleston, on a variety of issues involving geospatial work on their site. And we're capturing those interviews as a series of YouTube video awareness videos that we want to be used by as many people as possible. For us internally, they're going to be used to help market to prospective students, but I would be very excited to have as many organizations in Illinois referencing them as they can to help promote and make geospatial technology to help with awareness issues. The other issue that I heard concern about was the cost of ESRI products. In higher ed, many universities and colleges are really beginning to deploy this idea of what are called thin clients, where effectively we deploy ESRI technology through a server, and all the student or the partner needs on their site is a computer with an internet connection, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be a new computer, where effectively we deploy the software off the server, and you just connect to the software, and all of the licenses run on our site. So one of our partners one of our projects is through our internship program, is that we have one master license, campus-wide license, and as long as the employer is using one of our interns from Lakeland, we effectively allow them to hit our license as part of an educational partnership. And I know through the University of Illinois that they have a number of campus-wide site licenses with ESRI, and you could deploy a very similar approach across networks as well. So that's just something that I wanted to throw out there. I think this is going to be very transformative. And in a rural area, this is a really nice thing when I have this technology, and my students do not have to come to class on some days, and they can just hit our server and just access through their internet connection and run the software. And I think that Zach and this is a great demonstration to show how you all could be running like ArcGIS through a thin client, and all you would need to have is a live internet connection. You could run an ESRI technology that way. And then I'll be curious of other partnerships that you folks might have as well. So to wrap up, I was just going to show you that Lakeland has done a number of workforce studies of interviewing and producing profiles of what GIS technicians do and what they need to know to do their jobs. And we use a process called a DACUM. And a DACUM stands for Developing a Curriculum. And what we do in a DACUM is we take for 3 days, or I think it was 2 days, we interviewed 12 GIS technicians or analysts that work in East Central and Southern Illinois. And you can see the employers represented here. We told them that we wanted to be able to produce a curriculum to replicate their knowledge with the next generation of workers. And these folks were very generous of understanding the need for this technology. And these folks came in and we picked their brains for 2 to 3 days, and we really put together a profile. And we didn't just do this in Lakeland. We did these studies as part of Geotech Center at a variety of urban, suburban, and rural locations, because we wanted a synthesis. We understood that how people use GIS in an agricultural area like Lakeland could be very different than San Diego, right? So we did a number of these, and a number of these were funded through Geotech Center, and we put these together to produce these charts that you see next, and this is what I base my program on. And my only point to you is that, we produce these very simple one-page diagrams from basically workforce vetted models and interviews that basically suggest evidence of what we should be teaching, and we know why we should be teaching it because this came from people who do these jobs, GIS technicians. So you can see on the left are the duties: collecting data, modifying data, maintaining data, disseminating it, maintaining professional development, performing administrative responsibilities, and the task associated with them. I just wanted you guys to understand that we really understand very well of how to prepare people, how to work and manage like that parcel map I just showed you. So my point is that we have a pretty good hand on how to grow the next generation of workers. We just need to know how to reach them better and to market what we know and why it's important. And this all came about and was synthesized into a competency model that is now hosted on the Department of Labor's website. And this is basically the Geotech Center's main contribution, is that we have produced a model that you can now link to. And here is the model. And they did this for high-growth industries. GIS was not the only one. And some of you on this call will probably be very interested in the model that was produced for energy, or maybe bioscience, or maybe transportation. But I tend to think a lot of you on the call, it's energy might be very hot. But Geotech Center, we literally produced a national model for the Department of Labor for what people need to know to work in the geospatial technology industry. So I'll expect some of you, if you want to explore this, you could put your cursor over any one of these pyramids, and these pyramids are to help curriculum designers produce exercises and workshops to help people get to the top of the pyramid, which is where the GIS technicians are. So these are all the developmental skills, right? And the whole goal is the Department of Labor wants to see more people get up to there. And so each one of these sections is a description of the geospatial technology industry and what you need to know to build upwards into becoming a professional. So it's just an excellent resource, and I know at the Geotech Center, this is what Geotech really defines. The Geotech Center's mission is this pyramid. And again, our goal is to produce more people to get up at the top of the GIS technician level. So I think that pretty much gets me to wrap up to what is our future directions and training is, at Lakeland, we basically have a campus-wide site license that gives us unlimited access to Esri's online courses. We're beginning to produce about 20 to 30 hours of organized training targeting GIS skills needed to leverage local, state, and federal data sets. And the whole idea behind it is I'm really teaching students to learning to think global but to act local relative to information systems. And I've been attempting to move towards in this direction with a series of training events in a number of communities in our area, and I've met a number of you on this call at some of these events. I know Ken, as an example, is somebody that I met as my work through Geotech is to beginning to produce and disseminate our work with the Geospatial Technology Competency Model. But I still see technical barriers. there's a lot of problems of really getting this technology at the right place at the right time and having the right group of trainers to lead them. And these are still big issues that I see out there that are limiting the impact of the technology. And that's why I was excited about doing this call today, to see the help and partnerships we could have as a result of this event here today with the work that the Illinois Extensions does. Because I think you guys are at the right place at the right times in a lot of ways. It's going to be a big help for Geotech Center and having a bigger impact here in Illinois. And I will now conclude and turn it back over to Amanda, and I think it's 4:45, and that gives us 15 minutes for any questions or comments people have.
Yes, and this is Ken. Thank you very much, Mike. A wonderful presentation. And we do have a couple more questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
First question. Is it possible to link the data in the DevNet tax assessment program, which uses parcel numbers, to the attribute table for these GIS polygon parcels? Or would I have to import the attributes from DevNet into an Excel or Access program before taking that step?
My impression would be, I haven't heard of that other company's product, but generally speaking, if you can get it into an Excel product, we can tie it to a map. So an Access or an Excel file. My only question for the community would be, do you actually have a map demonstrating the actual shapes of the parcels? What is the format that the parcels are in is my big question. I'm not for sure if I got that from the question.
They didn't specify that, so they'll either have to send in clarifications or.
I would then conclude, Ken, that I would tell them in their software, can they export to a shapefile? Many of these smaller software companies, almost all of them have the option to export a data set in the form of a shapefile. And if they export it in the form of a shapefile, it will be directly imported into into an SRE product line.
Okay, very good. Second question. As we know, there are a lot of critical utilities buried now. You have helped many communities get started with mapping their utilities. Do you feel on a statewide basis most utilities are being mapped with GIS, or how far behind are we on a statewide basis?
I'll speak generally. My impression is that central and southern Illinois, basically downstate, is significantly behind in understanding where their assets are, utility assets. And there's a couple of communities that are kind of leading and I'll tell you, many of the communities that are doing utilities mapping are communities like Eastern or Charleston and Mattoon, and they have one thing in common. They probably are using interns from a university or college program. And that's where a lot of the small rural communities in Illinois that don't have a community college in their local area or university, they don't have that pool of student interns that are helping them with this massive project. And I think it hurts the economic development of a lot of these rural communities, because my general scorecard is that I think they're behind, and significantly behind, from the urban and suburban areas. And I can just give you an example. DuPage County, I think I went to their website once, and they had 10 to 12 GIS technicians or something, and I thought, most of our small rural communities just don't have that type of technical expertise to do those the projects are big, and so as a result, a lot of the small rural communities just don't have the manpower and the technology to tackle those big projects right now.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? People can pound 5 to unmute and ask a question. Any more comments from Zach or Amanda or Dr. Rudaba?
I just had one comment. I would like to hear feedback. To what extent is there a need to continue a formal webinar series with some sort of technical training, following the following a technician level training, is there an interest in showing some specific examples of how to edit a parcel map, how to query it, how to produce map layouts, and we can give some scenarios. Is there really a market and need to make more formal connections across the state of Illinois to extend more thoroughly how to use this technology in specific ways that we could probably give recommendations or take recommendations on what there's a need for? Because I think Zach and I talked, and I think we're very interested in what would be the next steps potentially to use this powerful net meeting technology to do some sort of technical demonstrations like we started today of actually getting into ArcGIS and doing demos like you saw here today.
And if people don't respond on the computer screen, then maybe they can enter comments on the written sheet so that we get some comments from the field. We'd appreciate that.
This is Amanda, and we did receive one person submitted via the question and answer that they would be interested in seeing a future webinar which would teach them how to edit and to focus on editing.
That was one of the number one things that came out in our DACOMs was from GIS technicians that editing was one of the more common tasks that they're required to do, and like how to split parcels and how to edit attribute tables, so that's not surprising.
And I'd also add that if people go home and they something pops up in their mind, please don't hesitate to email either Mike or myself, and this is something we'd really like to hear from you guys about what the needs are as far as training goes.
Very good. We'll proceed. Should we have a final reminder about the future telenets coming up? January 19th, we have intergovernmental agreements. February 16th, the importance of broadband. March 15th, special structure assessment. April 19th, siting and permitting wind farms in Illinois. And I'd like to wish everyone happy holidays. And Amanda, do you have any other wrap-up comments?
I just want to say a great job to our presenters, our facilitator, and our tech support today. I want to thank all the listeners out there in the field. You guys did a great job of using the online chat. Those of you who had the ability to submit questions and provide feedback, we want to continue to hear from you. You have the contact information for everyone involved today. Please follow up with them to continue this conversation. Also, it's very important to the Tele Institute program that we receive both the sign-in sheet that should have been completed locally as well as an evaluation form so that we can find out what additional types of information, educational programming you would like to receive in the future. And we hope that everyone is able to join us again on Thursday, January 19th for the beginning of our spring part of this year's Tele Institute series. So thanks and have a great evening.